Okay, so today we're jumping right in to the really tense situation that's been building up on the Thai-Cambodian border. We're going to break down a pretty complex story here, all based on a detailed report from the Klahan Post. We're talking fences, totally conflicting stories, and some seriously high-stakes political games. Right off the bat, you see this quote from a senior Cambodian diplomat, and it just sets the tone, doesn't it? This isn't being painted as some simple border squabble. No, the argument here, according to the source, is that this is a deliberate military strategy, one that's just designed to look like a diplomatic hiccup. It tells us we're looking at a calculated game of chess, not some accidental mistake.
So, how did this whole thing flare up? Well, like a lot of modern conflicts, it didn't start with a bang. It started with a war of words, what the source article actually calls a disinformation war.
Now this is where it gets really interesting, because you're looking at two completely different realities. On one side, the Thai media narrative says Cambodia's prime minister agreed to push back border talks. But on the other, Cambodia's government says absolutely not. In fact, they say they've made 5 formal requests to meet and have just been met with total silence. So right away, there's a huge fight over who is actually holding up the peace process. And that just brings us to the biggest question, right? If all this public bickering over meeting dates is just noise, what's actually happening on the ground? What's the real source of all this friction? Well, this is where words become actions. The real heart of Cambodia's complaint comes down to what it calls strategic encroachment, the physical building of fences and barriers in these contested zones. Cambodia has actually filed formal diplomatic protests against some very specific construction projects. We're talking about a planned permanent fence, the use of huge shipping containers as makeshift walls near the historic Priya Vihar temple, and new barbed wire going up at key flashpoints. You see, for Cambodia, these don't look like defensive measures. They look like a unilateral attempt to change the border for good. And this number, wow, this really puts the human cost into perspective. According to the report, these new barriers have blocked an estimated 80,000 Cambodian civilians from getting to their own homes and their farmland. So this isn't just about lines on a map. It's about people's actual livelihoods.
So you have to ask yourself, why? Why is all of this happening right now? What could possibly be the motivation for taking actions that seem to risk a much, much bigger conflict?
The analysis in the Klahan Post report suggests that to find the answer, we might need to look inward, specifically at what's going on inside Thailand's own domestic political scene. The report floats this theory of a nationalist ploy. And the basic idea is pretty simple and honestly pretty powerful. Creating a crisis with another country can be incredibly useful at home. It can rally people around the flag, it can distract from domestic problems, and it lets certain groups, like, say, the military, grab more control. And look, this isn't just some random theory. The article actually quotes a regional security expert, Dr. Thitinan Pongsuderek, who basically argues that this friction on the border serves a real purpose for the Thai military royalist establishment. If you create a security crisis, well, that's a pretty good way to argue for a bigger budget and a more powerful seat at the table, especially when there's been political instability back in Bangkok. But these political games, if that's what's going on, they have a real and devastatingly high price. So let's pivot for a second and look at the wider human and economic costs of this standoff. First, just look at this number, $5 billion. That's the estimated value of the trade between the two countries that has basically been frozen because of these tensions. That is a massive economic hit, and it has very real consequences for businesses and for workers on both sides of that border. And the damage goes so far beyond just money. I mean, in Cambodia's border provinces, schools are closed, there's a growing threat from newly laid landmines, a terrifying reality. And this all just echoes the recent bloody past. A conflict back in 2011 led to dozens of civilians dying. The source even suggests that this narrative you might hear about, scam centers, is being used as a kind of smokescreen to divert the world's attention away from these core land issues. So with all this pressure, Cambodia is starting to signal that it's not just going to sit around and wait for talks forever. It seems to be preparing to take this whole dispute to the world stage. Now, this is really crucial. Cambodia believes it has both history and international law on its side. Its claims are built on old colonial-era treaties and, maybe most importantly, a landmark 1962 ruling from the International Court of Justice. That legal precedent? That's the bedrock of its entire strategy. And here you can see the playbook Cambodia is threatening to run. If these bilateral talks keep going nowhere, it's pretty clear what their next steps are. First, they'll bypass the existing Joint Commission. Second, they'll appeal directly to the UN Security Council. And finally, they'll take the whole thing back to the International Court of Justice. That would turn this regional dispute into a massive international legal battle. Which really just leaves us with this final critical question. The report we've been looking at details this incredibly complex web of military moves, political strategy, and diplomatic deadlock. But as we've seen, when a border gets turned into a political stage, it's painfully clear who really pays the price. It's the communities, it's the families, it's the 80,000 civilians who are caught right in the middle.